Asyle, the Engineer and the Island. Week 21, Day 1. Today sees me 4 months in on this island, and although the new house still isn't finished, I've decided instead to stubbornly stick to my new routine of going around the base each month and performing maintenance before moving on to other projects. Besides, the concrete probably still needs a little longer to set. I checked on the fishing lines and they were fine for the most part, but I wasn't certain if the tide pool was working appropriately. It could have stood to have been bigger and or deeper, and have a wet path to the ocean to keep fish from being stressed out too much as they're being dragged in. Also, the inside could have been lined with clay to keep the water from leaking out between tides. I spent an hour or so digging it out a bit, though there wasn't a lot I could do about lining it until I could get all the water out of it, so I had to scoop it out with a pot first. Nothing needed to be done with the chicken houses or beach hut today. The garden's almost ready for harvesting, but I'll worry about that later. However, I have noticed that the yams were starting to sit in the water stream trickling over the taro beds. They could get moldy that way, so I devised a system of channels down the slope that'll keep the yams out of the water, but still let the roots touch it. I wanted to get this done quickly, so I just chopped up some bamboo poles and stuck them under the cover. The kitchen hasn't seen a lot of action outside of making meals, and I've always been fastidious about cleaning up after myself, so there wasn't a lot that needed repair or replacement. Just greased up the fan a little while I was there. At least the refrigeration system didn't seem to be leaking this time. Looking at it now, I kind of wish I'd made the building out of a concrete mix like my new house, so it would be stronger, but I don't think it would be practical to replace it anytime soon. I didn't bother checking on the boat today. Fortunately, there wasn't too much to worry about for the workshop today either, since I've mostly been busy with earthwork this past month. The tool tip on the lathe was getting a bit dull though, so I made a new one from a carefully split piece of volcanic glass. I also made sure everything was lubricated. I checked on the lab, and particularly the electrolytic cells. It's been running for 19 days, and if we assume the Van de Graaff generators are outputting about 1 milliamp altogether, and the iron has a molar mass of 55.8 grams per mole, then that means I should have deposited almost a whole gram of iron. My plate is about 10 by 10 centimeters, and the iron, having a density of 7.8 grams per cubic centimeter, means the plate should only be about 0.01 millimeters thick, almost imperceptible, even though I know the reaction's occurring, because bubbles are being created on the opposite side of the cell. This is going much too slowly, so I'm thinking of trying to build at least a basic electric generator without an iron core. It won't be as strong as a generator with an iron core, but my understanding is that any slight change in the magnetic fields passing through those coils will produce a current that'll start building up on itself as the current gets stronger during rotation, so it should be possible. I cut a piece of bamboo and jointed it together into a plus shape before carefully wrapping some copper wire around each end of the crossbar. This'll be my generator's rotor, and I tried to give each leg of the rotor as many coils as possible, while also keeping them as short as possible, as that will increase the strength of the magnetic fields inside them. I also made a pair of jointed pegs to sit on either side of the rotor to act as the stator, and likewise wrapped them in wire. I then wrapped 2 short pieces of wire each around half of each side of the axle, and held them against the wires on the rotor coil with a larger sleeve of bamboo. This will act as the commutator for the generator, to make sure it generates a direct current instead of an alternating one. Finally, I connected one side of the commutator wires to the stator coils. This was so that half of the current from the rotor goes into the stator, increasing the magnetic flux the rotor receives. Kind of sounds like free energy on the surface, but it also increases the drag on the generator, so more mechanical energy gets turned into electrical energy. Once I was sure I'd gotten the coils wired up correctly, I attached this apparatus to the lathe with the intent of leaving it running continuously. I then brought the electrolysis rig into the workshop and hooked it up to the new generator. Now, it's not going to be very powerful, in spite of its moderate size, so I estimated it may be able to produce about as much current as a small electric motor consumes, about 200 milliamps. That's still 200 times as much current as the Van de Graaff generator was producing, so even if the voltage is pretty low, there's still a good chance it could electroplate 200 times faster. Since the Van de Graaff generators were no longer being used for anything, I figured I might as well start using them to produce some nitric acid. No point in wasting the electricity. I remembered that nitric acid can be produced by dissolving nitric oxide in water, and nitric oxide has been produced industrially by reacting nitrogen and oxygen from the air together with an electrical arc. So I simply ran the wires from the Van de Graaff generators into the bubbler rig and set it pumping, using one of the Van de Graaff rollers to drive the membrane pump. I'll leave that one to run for a few days as well. I stopped for lunch before getting back to work. I noticed in the lab that my stockpile of latex was getting pretty full, so I figured I might as well make some new mattresses for the new house. So I dug out a space and fluffed up the requisite latex. It occurred to me as I did this that it may give the false impression that there's more than one person living on the island, so that may cause some confusion among the smugglers if they come looking for me. Might even be able to get them to split up, so I don't mind making more than I need. It's not like I'm going to be using the latex for anything else anytime soon anyway. My gloves had also gotten pretty worn down from working with concrete and planting for weeks on end, so I decided to make a new pair. So I had to turn off the coil generator while I used the lathe for sewing. I'll leave them to dry overnight, and I'll vulcanize them tomorrow morning. I got on with my maintenance rounds and checked on the bathhouse. The pool didn't really need any cleaning, so I just emptied out the composting toilet. Then I inspected the solar tower, greasing up the turbines and pulleys and keeping the panels calibrated. The decoration on the outside is still unfinished. I have nothing to do with the metallurgical equipment at this time, and I've yet to have an opportunity to test out the fractionating column. However, it occurred to me that I'm going to need more lamp oil eventually, and fuels for other projects, particularly if I want to make explosives for mining. And I'm starting to get a bit of a surplus of firewood, surprisingly, so I think I'll start distilling my excess wood in the mornings from now on. I'll still have the coal left over for burning. I'll just need to make sure that it cooks without air, so I'll set aside a pot and lid to put the wood in tomorrow. Before the day ended, I checked on the music machine, but it doesn't really need any maintenance, because I've been using it a lot and lubricating and tuning it as necessary while I've been programming it. I then checked on my clocks, including the new pocket watch, though it was almost too late to use the sundial to calibrate them. The only thing I had left to check at that point was all the defensive stuff, but I'll get back to that tomorrow. It's kind of been nice not worrying about it today. Getting back to a routine that keeps my mind off being paranoid and back to thinking practically. After having dinner and cleaning up for bed properly for the first time in a while, I think I can approach defenses with a level head tomorrow. Week 21, Day 2. After a reasonable night's sleep, I got back to my old routine and back to work. I added the wood to the kiln for distillation and put my gloves in the pressure cooker early, before starting my morning chores. I then decided that the first order of business was getting the bamboo watered, but I didn't want to have to water it myself every morning, so I split and hollowed out some bamboo stalks to make a channel from the taro garden. The runoff will now dribble into the bamboo surrounding the base continuously. However, I realized that I couldn't put holes in it, otherwise most of the water would pour out upstream, nor could I allow it to follow the slope, otherwise most of the water would dribble out downstream. So what I did instead was make the water troughs level all the way down so that they dribbled water on their section of the bamboo equally, some of which ended up dribbling into the next trough downhill. It actually makes a lovely sound, like a water feature, all around the base, though I also recognize that it'll make it a little harder to hear danger approaching. Truthfully though, I probably wasn't going to hear anyone coming anyway, regardless of the precautions I took last week. Unless of course they come by motorboat, which is the most likely scenario and also the easiest to hear. I haven't heard an internal combustion engine since I got here, which will make it conspicuous, in addition to being a sound I could go perfectly well with not hearing again for the rest of my life. I then got back to work on the new house. I decided to make a staircase up to the roof on the outside of the house, next to the door, and at first I considered making it out of clay so I could just get on with it. But I also figured there was no point in half measures, so I mixed in some lime to make it hard. However, this also meant I couldn't walk on it while making the roof today, which meant I had to use the ladder, which in turn made everything take longer. As I got started, it also occurred to me that I wouldn't want the periscope on the roof to be accessible, so I had an idea to make the stair steps retractable. This will complicate the overall design of the stairway, and I had to take a moment to rethink it. This meant I couldn't make it out of one solid piece of concrete, but I did some quick thinking and came up with a solution that actually saved me some concrete, while still making the steps pretty solid. I partially built the steps out of clay, and covered them with concrete reinforced with bamboo. That way, when they finish setting, I can just scoop the clay out, and the steps will be hollow so I can work with them. I made them so that they had runners along their sides, which the steps above them could both rest on and slide across. I'll improve the efficiency of this mechanism with rollers once the steps have set. I made the area under the landing into a hollow alcove, where the steps could slide in, and where I could put the lavatory, and for convenience, I made an open space in the wall where I can unload the toilet from the outside, rather than having to take the waste through the office. I stopped for lunch when I was done with the staircase, before starting on the roof. I made the walls a bit taller than they needed to be, in order to make a short parapet around the roof. That way, I can use the roof as a porch, like in many Middle Eastern houses. I laid sticks across the top surface to give myself a sturdy place to stand while I worked, but also made sure that it sloped slightly to let the rain run off it, using some short sections of bamboo to make holes in the parapet for the water to drain out of. I also made 3 holes in the roof itself, one large hole for the periscope, and 2 in the centers for each ceiling dome, where I intended to add some wind turbines to help keep the inside of the house cool with ceiling fans. I filled in the domes on the inside to complete the ceiling at about the end of the day, when it started getting dark. Probably a mistake on my part. I then got ready for bed. Week 21, Day 3. After my morning chores, I continued working on the new house, particularly the interior. I used the clay-concrete mix to fill in the arches for the ceiling, the office desk, and the various shelves and bookcases around the office area, so that they look like they're part of the walls. I really love the appearance of them, because they remind me of the cleft from Myst Uru. In the bedroom, I finished the molding surrounding the bed frame and panic room staircase, also making it a simple bookshelf. However, I also left some holes in the molding for access to a locking mechanism. I then chopped down some bamboo in preparation for some carpentry, which I got started on after lunch. I made a cover for the basement staircase out of bamboo to act as a support for the mattress, but mounted it on a hinge so it can flip up and give me access to the staircase when I unlock it. I coated the bottom with a layer of concrete so it'll appear to be embedded in the bed frame and will hide the seam, so no one will suspect there's a secret panel there even if they look under the mattress. While I was at it, I made the secret locking mechanism, which is simply a button that opens a latch holding the trapdoor closed. Normally, it'll be hidden by a book, so you have to push the book in to make it open, like you always see in old movies and cartoons with the secret bookshelf. It didn't need to be very sophisticated, though, because I figured I would need to get into the panic room in a hurry. Then, once I'm inside, I can just bar the door so no one can come in, whether they press the secret button or not. Easy to install. I then broke my bamboo into slats, which I tied together to make little cupboard doors for the storage shelves I'd built around the office and bedroom. I also built a wardrobe for the bedroom. Never really cared for such things until today. I was always content to just fold up my clothes and hide them under my bed. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I made some covers for the windows, before varnishing everything and leaving them to dry overnight. Week 21, Day 4. After my morning chores, I started on some clay work so it could dry during the day. I made a second complex toilet pot for a start, and a wash basin that could sit above it and function as both a reservoir for the toilet and a sink and shaving mirror for myself. I could see that I would need some extra hose to connect the two, as well as to save myself from having to gather water for the basin regularly, so I decided to just make a full spare hose to hook up to the solar tower. I also made some more clay lanterns, and realized I had a little problem with my current designs for the house. The lanterns will work best at the focal point of the dome's ceilings, but that's also where the fans need to be. If I hang the lamps below the fans, they may set the fans on fire. If I set them on top of the fans somehow, they may shake with the fans and spill embers all over the place. I came up with a relatively simple solution by building a static brace at the bottom of each dome that will act as both a bearing for the fans and a secure mounting for the lamps. While I was at the lanterns, I remembered to make those clay tubes for the wind chimes I wanted to hang at the bunker. Just like that, it was time for lunch, and I was kind of surprised by how fast time flew by today. I then set about installing the wardrobe, cupboards, and window covers I made the other day, before getting on with the ceiling fans. I made them more or less the same way as the others, spending a couple of hours weaving the fan blades and attaching them to central shafts, which I mounted in the holes in the ceiling and braces, opting to put the fans in the space between the ceiling and the brace, so the dome acts like a funnel. I made sure there was a gap between the axle and the edges of the ceiling holes, so there would be a place for hot air and smoke from the lanterns to escape through. And at the bearing in the center of the braces, I put a small brake so I could adjust the top speed of the fans by twisting a knob and some cord. Next, I built the turbine itself, and since the axis of rotation was going to be vertical, I decided to build the turbine blades around that axis, like on the other buildings, as opposed to the horizontal turbines I used for the pumps. I made sure that the turbine was tall enough that the blades weren't going to hit me in the head, using some poles for cross-bracing. This turbine turned the bedroom fan, and to save time, I decided to use it to drive the office fan at the same time, by connecting them with a pair of pulleys and a rubberized bamboo cord. The breeze created by the fans felt nice, so at the end of the day, I decided to install my new mattress, which had finished airing out over the past few days, and to sleep in the new house tonight. Week 21, Day 5. It took a little getting used to at first. I can tell there are many sounds I'm going to have to deaden now that I've gotten used to hearing the ocean at night. The fans rattle a bit, and the trickling of the bamboo watering system is actually more annoying to me than it is relaxing. Once I dealt with those, I realized I could still hear the ocean through my acoustic telephone, just a little more softly, and it helped lull me to sleep. In the morning, I got the clay items I made the other day into the kiln early, before starting my morning chores. Then I got some bamboo and started building some doors, the main door leading into the office, and a door between the office and the bedroom, only building a lock for the former and contenting myself with a simple crossbar for the latter. I also built a chair for the office desk. After lunch, I varnished these before moving on to installing the toilet pots, wash basin, and lanterns once they'd finished cooking. I had a few hours left at the end of the day, so I decided to do a little work on the basement. digging out a small alcove in the wall for another bed, because I don't know how long I may need to hide down there. Then, before the sun went down, I dug a trench next to the house and carefully repositioned the acoustic telephone so that it piped sound into the basement before moving all the stuff I squirreled away in the cave to the panic room: food, water, tools, and an empty chamber pot. I got to bed a little late because I had to stop and replace my pencil again. Since the sound trumpet is still pretty close to my head, I can still kind of hear the ocean even from under the house, though just barely. I made a note to create another short sound pipe from the basement into the bedroom so I can hear the trumpet more effectively if I'm asleep. Week 21, Day 6. When I was done with my morning chores, I noticed that I was starting to run low on paper, and since I'm going to want a lot of books for my bookshelves eventually, I decided to get started on another batch. There's plenty of leaves and wood scraps left over from all the carpentry I've done this week. I also spent my time between operations making some nice bark hardback covers for my books when they're ready. I used the grindstone to make sure that the surfaces were smooth and pleasant to handle, and I plan on potentially covering them with paper or cloth later, instead of banana leaves, so I can make them different colors or put illustrations on the covers to make them easier to identify, and overall more professional looking. While I was in the workshop, I decided to prepare a few final homey touches for the house by using my remaining fabric to make some rugs, which should make cleaning the floors a little easier, as well as feeling nicer on my bare feet. I could probably just use woven harakeke like I used for my beach hut, but they take a long time to make by hand, and I don't like how they feel on my feet as much. I cut the fabric to shape and hemmed the edges. I still had a couple of square meters left over, and decided to make it into a privacy curtain for the lab, because for some reason, even though I'm trapped alone on a deserted island, I'm still worried about privacy. Once I was done sewing, though, I soaked the fabrics in potash, because I planned on dyeing some patterns into them later. Perhaps I could have done this by weaving the patterns in, but that would have taken a lot of time and effort, and I think dyeing a pattern into them would be easier. However, this also meant that I would be out of spare cloth, and I knew I would want something to fill the wardrobe with eventually, so after lunch, I set another round of plant fibers grinding, soaking, and spinning into fibers. It's actually been a pretty low-key day so far, and I'm kind of enjoying it, though I was made aware again of how vulnerable I was in the workshop when all the machinery was running and I couldn't hear anyone coming. All I could think to do was to keep checking the windows. I soon set the auto loom running and decided to just spend the remainder of the afternoon preparing fibers for future projects, and at the end of the day, I finished moving most of my remaining stuff from the beach hut to the house, including my books, writing, art, and cartography equipment into the office. Combined with the rugs, it's starting to feel quite homey indeed. Week 21, Day 7. It's my Sabbath, and while I was out foraging during my morning chores, I collected a few extra plants for some artistic projects I wanted to work on today, particularly turmeric, pink leaf, purple yams, red pine cones, and other plants to produce green and brown colors. When I got back to base, I ground my plants down and squeezed the juices out of them before leaving them near, but not in, the solar kiln to concentrate. I got one of my brushes and found a split piece of bamboo to act as a guide or stencil for making patterns on my pieces of cloth, using my charcoal pencil to mark out patterns I thought would be interesting. Almost like a paint-by-numbers kit. Once the dyes had become concentrated, I made a somewhat surprising discovery, as one of the dyes that I thought would be green became a dark greenish blue. I scoured my memory banks for a few minutes before concluding that one of the plants that I picked for green dye must have been some wild relative of indigo, native to tropical climates. Cooking the leaves and exposing the compounds inside to oxygen must have caused a chemical reaction producing the dye indigo. I made a mental note of which plant that was, and collected some specimens for propagation near the base. I'm so pleased that I don't have to use copper minerals for blue dyes anymore. I then started lightly painting my rugs. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I could see that the colors kind of bled out from where I applied them because of the capillary effect between the liquid and the fibers. However, I did discover a few other techniques for making patterns, like making a groove in the piece of bamboo and rolling it to make repeating stripes. The key to making patterns this way, I found, was to use as little dye as possible so it couldn't bleed. Therefore, I found it easier to just apply a thin layer of dye to the bamboo shaft itself before stamping or rolling it onto the fabric. I finished dyeing the rugs before lunch, in various angular patterns of orange, purple, and yellow for the most part, giving them a sort of Native American style that I liked. Afterwards, I went out looking for more of those indigo plants and transplanted them in the shade behind my house before diluting what little indigo dye I had left and applying some simple patterns to the bottom of the lavatory and bathhouse curtains. Just seemed like a more appropriate color for them. At the end of the day, I decided to use what was left of my dyes for some painting, mixing them with chestnut oil and a little clay as a thickener. I decided I wanted to make a simple mural on the domes of the house ceiling, since I'm too lazy at this point to bother making tiles, and I wanted to try new methods. I can always cover it with tiles later if I need to. I marked out the patterns ahead of time with my pencil, and basically just ended up painting a bunch of fir trees on the ceiling, along with some ash from the kilns to make a gray paint for the sky. It reminded me of home, and the fact that it took me a little mental effort to even remember what a fir tree looked like made me realize that I'd forgotten to feel homesick for a while. Maybe I've been keeping myself a little too busy. When the sun went down, I got ready for bed, and as I looked up at the murals I made, I thought to myself that I really need to focus on getting back home again. Blooper Reel. The kitchen hasn't seen a lot of action outside of making meals, not metals. Eyes, eyes. I need eyes. Since the Van de Graaff, since the Van de Graaff generator, since the Van de Graaff generators were no longer being, since the Van de Graaff generators were no longer being used for anything, I'm speaking way too fast to be safe. I'm gonna crash. Slow down, slow down, slow down. Ah! Okay, waking up the mic again. I figured I might as well start using them to produce night. I figured I might as well. I figured as. Sniff. Sniff break. I used the clay/concrete mix to fill in the arches for the ceiling, so that they, so that they look like, so that they look like they're kind, so that they look like they're part of the, such that they look like they're part of the walls. Wake up the mic, wake up the mic, wake up the mic. But mounted it on a hinge so I can flip it up. I lost my place. Because I figured I would need to get into the band. I made a second complex toilet pot. I made a second compact. Wake up the mouse, wake up the mic, wake up the mic, wake up the mic. Back to it. I used the grindstone to make sure the surfaces were cooking the leaves. I coated the bottom with a layer of concrete so that it. I coated the con. Why is this section so hard to read? Hey there, thanks for listening all the way to the end. As nice as it was to move into a more secure house, I really do think it's time to start working more seriously on getting out of here before the smugglers come back. So, if you'd like to see how I intend to do that, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to get notified when the next episode is ready. While I have no intention of monetizing these videos, it would still help me out more than anything else if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. And since you apparently enjoyed it enough to watch it this far in, you can press the like button to say so. Every little bit of engagement helps the algorithm notice I'm here and gets me closer to a way off the island. Also, if you want to chat about your own stories and perspectives on the episode, feel free to share them in the comments down below. I genuinely love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions and corrections. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.